Electric vehicles or EVs have always been a hot topic to discuss, particularly because of the variation of opinions we get to see. Some people absolutely love them, some people appreciate them for what they are, and some people just absolutely hate them. So I believe that one shouldn't form an opinion about anything until they understand it fully. That's why today we have with us Steve Birkett, who is an electric vehicle advocate. He specializes in electric cars and makes content regarding them as well. He has assisted as an EV guide for Plug in America and has been a crucial part of focus groups that focus on setting up charging networks in the US. So, we have tried to break down his journey with cars, with EVs on this episode of Shift with Motordrift. So, welcome, Steve. Glad to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Rishabh. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah. So, my first question for you is when and how did your journey with cars started? Like, at what age did you start to develop the interest?
Well, I have a kind of broken history with cars. Really, my interest in vehicles, and cars dates back to racing when the UK, where I'm originally from, and race meets with my dad at everything from the local track down in the southwest of England, Castle Combe, all the way up to international races like Le Mans 24 Hour in France, and Silverstone, the Formula One Grand Prix.
Mm.
So pretty, very heavily combustion, of course, because that was what it was in the 90s as I was growing up, not anything else to really do there. But then I had a kind of big break in my, I was a racing enthusiast, if you like, but not so much a car enthusiast. I was too young to drive at that point. And, I had a break when I moved to the US because we lived in New York City. It's a pain to own a car. You do not want to own one there. You're paying extra for the rent of the vehicle, the parking space. Everything is just more difficult with a vehicle in the center of New York. So I kind of have a big gap in my history of 10, 15 years there where I didn't really need to own a vehicle, use public transport, and cars kind of fell off the map for me. But then when we moved to Boston, Greater Boston, where I am now, we kind of hit suburbia again. So we need the vehicle. Everything in the US, as you know, is, very stretched out. A lot of the things you need to drive to get groceries and do all the boring, mundane stuff. So cars back on the radar. And this was just at the kind of starting point, 2014, 2015, where electric vehicles started to become, go from that little city car, the Nissan Leaf, and 50 or 60 miles to starting to get to a point where Tesla was on the radar and everybody was starting to talk about electric vehicles as a, viable transportation alternative. So we started in a 2012 Chevy Volt, which was my brother-in-law's car actually, but we were using that as our primary transportation. So that's a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So you've got the backup of gas, which a lot of people, of course, like because of the speed of refueling on long trips. 40 miles or so, 40, 45 miles for the daily commute or the, errands, all the usual stuff. And, a nice enough car. It's, it's a Chevy, so it's not any high-end luxury or anything. They have the history now of a decade or more in electric vehicles or electrification. So, they're building up that reputation, and those cars are still on the road after, 300, 400,000 miles, doing pretty well. And then we kind of moved, we thought maybe we can make the move to all electric. Let's give it a go. So the next car along, with Teslas still being in the six figures at that point, which was not in our budget as a 4-person family with 2 kids to feed. We moved to the Chevy Bolt, which was 2017 model, I believe. And never really looked back, honestly. We'll talk, I'm sure, about some of the drawbacks of electric vehicles in their current form and where that's going. But, we've not paid for gas for many, many years. And with the, gas shortages in the east coast of the US at the moment, that's feeling good.
Yeah. Gas prices have, been an all-time high. And to be a part of the crowd that, needs not to worry about gas prices,
That's it.
I sure it feels good.
You hate to kind of preempt it because they could just as easily have a cyber attack on the electrical grid. So we don't brag too much, but it is peace of mind. You can plug in at home. Your vehicle's 100% when you wake up in the morning. That's certainly one less thing off your errand list on the daily basis.
Yeah. So now, what's the car culture at the place you live in? Like, are there lots of EVs, or are there lots of exotic cars, or what is it like?
Yeah, I mean it's quite an affluent area. In parts, we're not in the a very wealthy area, but
Mm,
Boston, Metro Boston is one of the more expensive places to live in the U.S. We're very close to Lexington, which in Massachusetts, my kids have taken to calling Tesla Town because it is, and you don't drive far before you see a Model X, Model
mm,
S parked next to each other. Model Y was, first over there
mm,
for us, so that's where you go to see Teslas if you want. But we'll check out. Some not, I wouldn't say exotic supercars. People have a practical aspect to them. So there's a
mm,
lot of, you have a Porsche Cayenne and
mm,
Taycan has started to appear locally. So, we get some of the higher end EVs, certainly.
mm.
Um, in terms of performance cars, we're a little bit more suburban and sedate. So we probably don't see some of the, Ferraris and the Lamborghinis that you'd look out for.
Mm. Now, when did the interest in EVs in particular start to develop? Like you told that, like you became a fan of racing first. So, like, when did in particular the interest in EVs just start to develop?
Really on that second phase, as I described, cars just
Mm,
fell off the map for me, as I say, when I was in New York City because it was a functional A to B thing. So I
mm,
kept up with some of the racing, and obviously Lewis Hamilton as a fellow
uh,
Brit is, of a kind of inspirational cast for me. But we really didn't have to consider a personal vehicle until 2014, 2015 when we got up to Boston.
mm,
So that's when it started again. And if you take the current crop of electric vehicles, even going back 10 years, we'd be before the Model S had
mm,
come to market. And just when the Nissan Leaf, the first generation, which could do 70 miles at best, and on a good day, so that was very much, even 10 years ago, that was almost like you could only really have an electric vehicle as a city car, and then
mm,
it started. So I was kind of in the, I guess, the second wave, not the cutting edge, bleeding edge adopters, but certainly, the Chevy Bolt
mm,
that we had was one of the first kind of 200 plus miles of range vehicles that came on the market. It was a few months launched before the Tesla Model 3, but the Model
mm,
3 took a long time to ramp up to production here in the US. So that
mm,
was, available for a year or two before the Model 3 really kind of got to, it's the place it is now as the standard bearer for, EV adoption.
mm. Now, what are the cars you currently own? And are they all EVs?
That's it at the moment. We've kind of had a place where we had two in the driveway. The other one was a Bolt again, so we've not done anything too adventurous. At the moment, I am looking at the next generation of EVs from non-Tesla manufacturers. So the Hyundai Ioniq 5 is getting a lot of attention for its quick charging times.
Mm,
Kind of 0 to 60 in about 5.2 seconds on the top end
mm,
spec. So that's solid enough for a Tesla competitor.
mm,
Obviously eyeing up stuff like the Ford Mustang Mach-E GT, which has that
mm,
3.5 seconds 0 to 60. I have the
mm,
balance. I have two kids, so I have the
mm,
practical side chatting to me about everything needs storage space, practicality,
mm,
needs a hatchback, that kind of thing. And in my other head, 0 to 60. Let's go faster than the line. Race away from the lights, that kind of thing.
mm,
So there's competing, influences for the car in the driveway, but there probably will be two at some point. And
mm,
I don't honestly see us going back to gasoline now, just because of the way our family has been able to, integrate electric vehicles into our lifestyle. And it's
mm,
just, the only real advantage I see now as a daily driver. And, I have a lot of fun in EVs. I think the instant torque is,
mm,
you know, is a big winner. I like the quieter ride in general. I see the place for combustion cars in
mm,
racing as weekend drivers. Certainly, I wouldn't ever want to lose that car culture, that classic kind of
mm,
the roar of the engine, the race day meets. It's all in my
mm,
history. But I think for a lot of people, the vehicle has two places. There is the weekend, as you say, the kind
mm,
of garage find that you want to keep there and looking pristine and lovely. And there's no reason I think that shouldn't be a gasoline combustion vehicle if that's what your heart kind of goes
mm.
after. So I think that will continue to be the case. But I think as a daily driver, I don't see us having anything other than an EV.
Yeah. And well, EVs are only going to advance as of now. So I think that, like you probably wouldn't ever need to go back to gasoline. And that point that you said regarding EVs as a daily driver, even I think the same. For example, if I want to go to my office on a Monday morning, I don't need my engine to like like just roar. I don't need to, like upshift and downshift. All I want to reach is the damn office. So at
Yep.
that moment, I just want to go in a car. So Monday to Friday, maybe an EV, and on weekends, I will have a V8 Mustang.
Yeah, you can tear up the roads on the weekends, right? You're not in a frame of mind when you wake up and you need your coffee to, to set out in traffic. And
Mm,
again, like EVs come with that technology as well. That even my base, the Chevy Bolt is a very, starts of the mill Chevrolet car, not no frills, but
mm,
the technology in electric vehicles just begins at a higher level than
mm,
a lot of combustion equivalents because that's what people demand. It's supposed to be
mm,
seen as this kind of more forward-thinking future car. So the
mm,
driver tech in any EV is going to be, trying to catch that Tesla. I don't think it's fair to call it autopilot, really.
mm,
The self-driving is not there yet, but it's certainly a much more comfortable either commute or road trip when you're in
mm,
this, vehicle that's quieter. You're not racing away from the line because you can't, because
mm,
you're stuck in a bumper to bumper traffic. This is
mm,
not a scenario for a screaming V8. This is, this is a quiet ride and your favorite podcast on to relax you.
mm. Now, can you please explain the term electric vehicle advocate? Like I have heard it for the first time, and I'm sure that there are many people like me. So can you please explain it?
Yeah, I hesitate to call myself an expert because you get the, I have a lot of experience and history with electric
Mm,
vehicles, but I don't have any engineering degree. There's a very, significant swathe of
mm,
battery technology that's constantly changing that
mm,
I would be hard pushed to speak to. So experts and the engineering overlap, I'm not so comfortable with, but advocacy is simply a word for, support, vocal support
mm,
to move EVs forward, to say, to local towns that EV charging needs to happen
mm,
so that can it supports the adoption to look at road trips that we've taken and say in this area you're losing business because you haven't
mm,
installed charging. There's a big gap and there's no way that people are going to stop.
mm,
And the industry is going that way now. We see, I think, to me the tipping point was around 2018, at least in North America,
mm,
where the three got up to volume production and was starting to take over the market, and Tesla proved that they could not go bankrupt, basically, that all the naysayers and the short sellers were wrong,
mm,
and that they were going to be a viable force in the automotive sector for the next
mm,
decade and beyond. And
mm,
I think that's where everybody started to say, well, crap, we need to invest now. There's tens of billions of dollars from the American automakers alone,
mm,
going into battery technology and all this kind of thing. So it's only going in one direction,
mm,
that perspective. And I think we need to have people on the ground saying, this is the problem at the moment. These are the gaps. These are where I
mm,
see, coasts are great. California has, approaching 10% EV adoption, and there's a big infrastructure for vehicles out there, but that's only
mm,
one. California is a pretty narrow state, pretty,
mm,
few roads, the coastal road, the interstates that run up and down, and then you've got to go across the country as well. This country
mm,
runs on transportation,
mm,
so we need to have these solutions in place. We need to get chargers in the right place. We need to let
mm,
people know electric vehicles aren't slow. They're not the city cars that you would have had 10 years ago. These are
mm.
the technology has flipped itself on the head. And I think EV advocacy kind of falls into many of those buckets.
Yeah. And I think that the cars like the Model S and these cars, and they broke the traditional norms that people had regarding electric cars. People thought electric cars can't be beautiful. People thought they can't have good range. They can't be fast. Single car, the Tesla Model S came and it broke all the traditional norms people had regarding EVs. And I think that that kind of accelerated the process of their adoption.
Yeah, I don't see a place that we would be at today where we are without Tesla. I
Mm,
mean, as I say, I think the Model 3 proved that it can be not just luxury vehicles,
mm,
but, semi-affordable in that
mm,
$40,000 range that is more accessible to a lot of, middle America at least, or middle
mm,
income America. And that kind of is only going down. The prices are coming down. Battery technology, has advanced ridiculously fast in the
mm,
last decade. Prices, I think, of batteries have come down to from above $1,000 per kilowatt hour to close to 100 now. So you're talking about almost a tenfold decrease in
mm,
10 years, and that makes these things much more affordable.
mm,
Combined with government incentives and reasons for people to to go out and look at these things, plus climbing gas prices, is always
mm,
going to be an influencer. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a big part of that it was always those cars are, slow. They can only do, they're limited because if you go too fast, you run down that battery much quicker, which is still true. But now when you've got 300 miles of range, it really, plus 400, 500 coming down the horizon, people start to think, well, what's the difference with the combustion car now? And really the only answer to that is on a longer trip, you maybe spend 10, 15 minutes more, in these top end EVs charging, which, isn't a whole lot. And then the range is not quite there yet, but, you have 500 on Lucid Air, 500 miles on the new Tesla Model S Plaid. Beyond that, I mean, you're questioning how far someone can drive without needing to, take a break for the body rather than the vehicle.
Exactly. And like it's very rare that like basically just go beyond even like 50 or 100 miles in a day. Like most of the commutes are within like just like city commutes. So anyways, you don't need to like go beyond 100 miles. It's very rare.
Yeah, I mean, the average commute here in the US is 40 or 50 miles. So, people, as you say, aren't doing, major mileage on a daily basis. There's always an edge case. There's always going to be, and it's fair, people in Montana, the Dakotas over here from my, to take my example, you can go to the next city within 20 minutes. Over in those places, there could be 100 miles, 150 miles between the two big cities. A grocery run, maybe 40 or 50 miles one way. So those people need, that's where we need advocacy to put charges in the right places and get that kind of thing going. But again, that it's not going to happen in, click your fingers and everything happens overnight. It can't happen because the materials aren't there. The grid isn't quite, ready to support that level of overnight adoption. And automakers, frankly, aren't in a position to produce the cars to give people electric vehicles in every driveway. So there are different stakeholder groups. There's different, levels of people. For me, suburbanite kind of, family, it works perfectly. Everything's where we need it to be. We don't drive maybe more than 20 or 30 miles in a day. Commuters, again, as you say, 30, 40, 50 miles, even one way. If you've got charging at home, you wake up to 100% battery or, 90% if you carry your battery. And all of that stuff is, there are blocks of people that can adopt now. There are some who maybe, don't have a driveway or need to wait for the next wave of technology, and that's, but that's okay. Not everyone is going to do this tomorrow. It needs to happen over the course of 5, 10, 15 years, and get there slowly.
Yeah. And I think that electric vehicle advocates like you have a crucial role in like spreading the awareness regarding EVs as well. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, people still think a Toyota, Prius is a, full EV, and think that, a Tesla is the only option. Some people think that, as you say, that they're the city cars that we had 10 years ago. So some of it is simply saying, no, look, and, real world experience as well. I quite often drive 600, 700 miles to my in-laws in Ohio. And, it's kicking the tires on the network and saying, here's what's possible, here's what's not possible at the moment, and being honest about it. Because the last thing I want to do is get somebody in an electric vehicle who has no charging infrastructure, can't go to the places they want to go, and then turns back and says, that will never work for me, right? There's some people it's just not for right now. And that's okay. We need electric trucks. We need electric, we need the Roadster to go under 2 seconds to 60 miles an hour for some reason. All these things, will be on the development process in the next 10 or 15 years.
And I think that when people, get to experience a good electric vehicle, then their perspective regarding an electric vehicle changes. Because I have seen this, with my eyes. For example, here in India, there is a company named Tata Motors. So they recently launched a compact SUV. It was a combustion SUV, but they made an EV version of it by the name of Nexon EV. And when people actually test drove it, they were like, "This is actually good. We were so wrong about EVs. It's actually like one of the fastest cars in its segment. It looks good. It is comfortable as well, and the sales are just booming." Yeah.
That's awesome. It's good to hear that it's happening in everywhere really that it can happen. Maybe I can flip the question on you and ask you, where your point of EV kind of recognition changed, and what will you maybe miss about, what do you still kind of cling to as the thing that electric vehicles just can't replace for you with a a gasoline equivalent?
See, so the thing which I have, seen in electric vehicles, which I think that they can't, give me from an IC vehicle, is the feeling of upshifting and downshifting. For example, if I'm in a manual car, I shift to first gear. Okay, then the engine revs, it screams to the highest point, and then I go to second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth, these type of things, you know.
So there's an element of kind of talent in the driving that maybe is
Mm.
lost with the. Mhm. No, I think
Yeah,
that's fair.
yeah.
And again, I think that comes to the point that we had about I
Mm.
think that's always going to be the meeting point is some people will really miss that experience, and it doesn't
Mm.
have to go away. I think that's an
Mm.
important point to stress is that
Yeah.
people love it. We've got 100 years, a century plus of gasoline
Mm.
history,
Mm.
combustion technology, and
Mm.
it's still going to be there. People still want to build their do their own builds. People still want to get these collector's items. People still want to go racing on the weekend,
Mm.
tear up the back roads. All this stuff's still going to be there. I
Mm.
would hate to lose that as well, personally.
Yeah, and I think that if we use the existing fuels, all that we have additionally, like divide it into particular parts and then use it with, like applying some intelligence, I think that we still have a long way to go before we have to completely rely on EVs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
There may not be a day when we need to rely 100% on EVs.
Hmm.
It's why not have,
Hmm.
burning things is bad if it's everybody burning things
Hmm.
for every part of the economy. But
Hmm.
for these isolated, use cases that we're talking about, or just people enthusiasts, that
Hmm.
becomes a very small part of the overall transportation emissions. And it's totally
Hmm.
doable. There's no reason the all or nothing approach is just I see that as a negative thing
Hmm.
because it's going to put people against electric vehicles to say, well, if that's my only option, I don't want to do it at all. Or if
Yeah.
you say, well, have something, as we've talked about, have another option
Hmm.
for your gasoline, and then the rest of the time, here's your electric vehicle for whatever you find it useful for.
Hmm. And I think that the hybrid cars, they hit a perfect balance. They have like the enjoyment and the driver involvement of an IC car, and they have, the brisk acceleration that you get from an EV as well. So I think that hybrids may be, the transition state for EV owners to get a perspective of, okay, so this is how EVs work, and maybe in future, if I want to, I can get an EV.
Yeah, I mean, there are some very good options. It's hard because I think a lot of automakers are trying to go full electric and show that
Hmm.
they're not, having any half measures. So GM, with the car that got me into electric vehicles, the Volt, has now discontinued that. So there's some shift away from it in certain
Hmm.
places, but you also have Toyota who are less interested in, you know, all EV only
Hmm.
or battery electric vehicle only, I should say. But they have the RAV4 Prime, which is the plug-in hybrid,
Hmm.
which can get you to 60 in this boxy SUV in under 6 seconds.
Hmm.
There's still some pep to it, as you say.
Hmm.
There's still it's a good gateway vehicle, like the Volt was for us
Hmm.
to kind of bring people along, but still have that backup of the entire 100 years worth of gasoline infrastructure.
Yeah. So, like, when was the first time you drove an EV, and how was the first experience?
So are we talking all pure EV or
Yeah, pure
hybrids as
EV,
well?
pure EV.
Yeah. So my first would have been a Bolt TV. There was not very much on the market at the time, so um, that was what we could get into. At the time, the only other options would have been a Tesla Model S or Model X,
Hmm.
which was out of the price range, and Nissan Leaf, which was considerably slower. So this was a nice kick. It wasn't blow you back in your
Hmm.
seat acceleration, but my in-laws actually have a Tesla Model 3 long range,
Hmm.
which kind of 5 second 0 to 60, and that was the kind of realization, I think, of why Tesla had got there and
Hmm.
why electric vehicles were starting to turn heads in these things,
Hmm.
aside from the kind of funky, look of something like the Model X with its Falcon Wing doors, which is, pain in the backside to manage, but a brilliant marketing tool. The acceleration and that instant torque, and actually
Hmm.
also the one pedal driving, putting energy back into the vehicle.
Hmm.
There's quite a nice symbiotic feel. If we talk about driving talent and the kind of the feel of the vehicle when you're coming out of a corner,
Hmm.
and being able to kind of modular, have that linear acceleration where it's just you can feel the weight of the car underneath you, and the energy is going back into the vehicle. Then you're already on the accelerator. There's no messing around. You hit it just as you're coming out of the apex of the corner, and
Hmm.
you go again as long as the car can handle it, which admittedly the Bolt TV can't always do as a
Hmm.
front wheel drive family mover.
Mm.
It's there's a nice feel to driving most EVs because that low center of gravity and the balance of the vehicle is really nice in most cases. If you pair that with acceleration of something like a Tesla, you start to get a pretty nice driving experience that it's hard to go back to, at least in a you have to make the distinction between the kind of bog standard combustion
Mm.
cars and the kind of stuff that you would want to
Mm.
drive and that really moves, gets your heart racing. So that's a different story. But when you go back to any regular gasoline car, it's just not the same. It's really hard to get used to pushing the accelerator and waiting for something to happen. Now, you
Mm.
obviously say I'm in the wrong car if I'm doing that, right?
Mm. Mm.
If it's a normal driver, it's just not the same to go back from an electric vehicle with instant torque and the one pedal driving to something that you have to push on the accelerator and just wait for something to happen.
Yeah, and EVs offer that brisk kind of acceleration, but they don't like perform that much good at the top end. ICs
Yeah,
on the other hand, they have like not so good acceleration, like unless it is a performance car, but the top
mhm.
end is relatively great as compared to their EV brothers. So I think that
Yeah.
they
When
both
you
shine in different fields.
Yeah, when you're hammering along the interstate, especially you see this. I went down to Texas for an electric vehicle show in 2020 before all the closures happened, and you're cruising along the highway at what in Massachusetts would be a pretty steady, 75,
Mm.
80 miles an hour.
Mm.
In an EV, that's draining. That's bad practice. You're not
Mm.
maximizing range of that. You're just trying to get where you need to go. And there are
Mm.
trucks even not even well engineered or anything that's particularly special. Just a big brodozer truck
Mm.
hammers down 90 miles an hour in the opposite lane. We're just like, yep, that's where these things shine. If I do that, I'm running out of battery in 100 miles. So, I have to we're still modulating that, and we still have to get
Mm.
these bigger vehicles that can handle it with
Mm.
the bigger packs and the faster charging. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, at that high end at high
Mm.
speeds for a long time, when you can stop and fill up for gas within,
Mm.
5 minutes, that's the way to go for, full on high speed driving.
Mm. I think that in real world conditions, having a car with a faster acceleration makes more sense, because like there would be very rare instances that you would be going at 250 kmph or like those type of higher speeds. So acceleration is a good thing, having a fast
Yeah, I
accelerating
mean,
car.
if you think about just the terms we use, right? 0 to 60 is legal in most roads. Yeah, there's 30, 40 mile speed limits in
Mm.
some places, but you're always within that
Mm.
legal boundary, at least
Mm.
in the US,
Mm.
with 0 to 60. When you talk about top speeds, if someone's telling you their top speed is 150, 160 miles an hour, the ears of the local police are pricking up and like, all right, where are you using that? What track do you use? If you're using that on the interstate, I'm going to start to monitor your position.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, top speed is of course another key car metric. Of course, people are always going to look to that, but
Mm.
reality of day-to-day use in almost any public road is that 0 to 60 is the fun bit, and
Yeah.
top speed, like, yeah, you can use it, but you'd better be in the right place, otherwise you're going to be writing a pretty hefty check to the local
Mm.
officials.
Now, can you give a couple of reasons why should a person buy an EV in 2021 and not particularly a gasoline car for the same or lesser price?
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing is cost savings. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive when you look at the sticker price, and a comparative EV is $5,000 to $10,000. At least I'll use my
Mm.
local currency because that's what I know. Than a gasoline equivalent. But when you start to consider we immediately talk about gas and the prices, right?
Mm.
This could be as low as last year when people were filling up for nothing because nobody wanted it, to as high as this year where parts of California are spiking past $4 a gallon. And over in the UK, it's crazy expensive to fill up. You could spend 40 or 50 pounds on a tank.
Ooh.
And it's just it depends where you are, but the savings are always there. There's always going to be a cheaper way to fill up an electric vehicle, whether it's from your home or from a public charger, than to go and get a tank of gas. It's just
Mm.
the best the gas car can do usually is to get it on an even keel and get the
Mm.
same for a fill up. But it's almost always, 10, $15 to fill up an electric vehicle with 250, 300 miles range,
Mm.
even in the more expensive places. And I've never had a gasoline pump say $0 to me.
Mm.
Whereas there's a lot of places locally where I can just go up, plug in the car, go to lunch, come back, and it's filled up for free. because there's a lot of incentives at the moment. There's a lot of people getting solar electricity, which is dirt cheap if you're up in Quebec or the kind of northeast of the country or Pacific Northwest of the US. There's hydro. So electricity is very generation agnostic. So, it doesn't care where its source comes from. It just provides whatever. It can be as clean or as dirty as what you plug into. So it's automatically cheaper over the long term of the vehicle to fill up and run that car. Maintenance is ridiculously low. I look at the service schedule for my car, and it's like, go and make sure you get your tires rotated, but there's nothing much else. There's some fluid change at about 150,000 miles, which is just mind-boggling to me that it can go that long. Brake wear and tear is minimal because you have the regenerative braking, so it's braking electronically rather than physically tearing up the brake pads. So there are all these savings that mount up over the lifetime of a vehicle, and it's at least the same cost, but most likely for most people cheaper to get an electric vehicle over the lifetime of the car and its use. So you think of total cost of ownership versus sticker price. Plus, we're coming down, and there's a lot of incentives in the US at least to even up that sticker price initially. It's a very good economy play for starters. And then, the environmental aspect, if that's, some people, it's not a big deal. Some people it is, and if you have an interest in kind of, minimizing the impact of the vehicle, certainly locally, tailpipe emissions are not great for cities. As, a lot of people know, LA is somewhere that's benefited from, losing some of those tailpipe emissions. And that's why California leads the way for us in terms of electrification. So there's that side to consider. And then just the driving experience, like we've said, I think the biggest thing is get in one and try it, get in a good one, a Tesla or something that is going to show you the better side of that instant torque and see how it feels. If it doesn't feel right, then I don't, blame people for not getting in one and wanting to make it their daily driver. But I would say 9 out of 10 people are probably saying this drives well, feels good, it's quiet, saves me money in the long run. I don't really see a reason not to.
And I had an automotive service industry professional on the podcast as well once, and he was, he was surprised at how low costing, maintenance of EVs are. He was like, it's just so easy to, maintain an EV. There are just some brake changes, maybe, if the pads are, they are just weathered up, maybe some tire changes, maybe some tire alignment. That's all.
Yep. It's pretty underwhelming to lift up the hood on an EV, aside from a Tesla or a Mach-E, which has nothing there in the first place except the big storage area. There's not a lot going on. There is a high voltage components. There's the fluid that you have to consider is your windscreen washer fluid, and that's about it. There's not much complexity down there. The battery is obviously an incredibly high value and really engineered component, so that's something to take into account. But there are warranties on these things. They're getting very carefully managed and maintained. So yeah, you're not going to be spending a lot of time in a dealership, which is part of the reason that they push back against these in a lot of way, because maintenance is a big part of their revenue. So I do understand that, but it's you're not going to stop technology, unfortunately.
Now, since you're a Tesla owner as well, what are the issues that the car suffers from?
So I have a Tesla by proxy. My in-laws, have it over in Ohio, so it's not a regular daily driver for me. But we've done road trips. I've done a few videos on it, and their biggest complaint has been the service levels. I think it's fair to say, as most people do, that Tesla is a technology company first, and a car company some way second. The build quality on some early Model Ys has been disappointing, I think. So there's certainly that aspect of it, that it's a bit of a lottery when you take a new Tesla, whether it's going to be in one of the good batches that has no problems at all, or if you spend, there's kind of a running joke that you have to schedule your service appointment before you get the Tesla because it's going to go back and you're going to spend some time in the shop. But if you're near a major city, that's not necessarily, a problem. They're pretty close. We can drive, 10 miles to one here. So it's kind of like a dealership. The Tesla goes all in on minimalism. As you know, there's one big iPad in the center, and you either like it or you don't buy a Tesla, which is probably why we won't be in one. I think I still have that. I need that driver's information, center in front of me. I want that speed and the key information right, where I'm looking at the road rather than, trying to go down here to the iPad to fiddle with it and try and the wipers running, that kind of thing. So it wasn't as big of a jarring experience as I expected, but it's not my preference. If I have a choice, I will be having something that has a driver's information cluster in front of me. And not a lot else. I mean, people love Teslas for a reason. They have the kind of performance that nobody else has been able to match, blended with the efficiency of the vehicle so it can go a long way, and then a killer charging network that just, is second to none. So it puts a lot of the fears of getting an electric car, that you maybe can't go a long distance, that it'll take too long to charge, that it won't be fast enough. It kind of quashes all those, right? I mean, the service question mark is definitely one for people to consider. If you expect a very buttoned down, well-built vehicle for $60,000, you may not get that. It's not really luxury. It's more kind of tech, if you like, right? So you're paying a higher price for all of their investment in technology rather than the refinement of something like an Audi or a Mercedes.
So is the fit and finish good of the car?
The one that my in-laws got, yeah, it's they've had no real problems. We did have one incident where we couldn't take the Tesla to Canada because you have the border control, obviously, and their frunk wouldn't open through the app, and there's no manual release. This is a classic case of relying too much on technology and electrical components, and we were like, well, if they ask us to open that to prove there's no contraband in there, we're screwed. We're going back to back home. So we ended up taking a very clunky old Ford Explorer to do that trip. But this is just, these are minor things. There's not, there's these things in these vehicles as well. It's just that Tesla's kind of overemphasis on making everything technology focused and through the tablet is a little bit jarring to some people.
Now, there have been, lots of arguments regarding electric cars really being that clean. Like, there was a picture of a Tesla getting charged through a diesel generator. So can you please explain how electric cars cause relatively less pollution than their gasoline substitutes?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, those memes are great. There's the electric vehicle cartoon, plugged all the way into a coal-powered gas plant in the background, right? It's, these things are rooted in truth, but they are certainly hyperbole. So the first and most obvious one to point out would be: would you leave your car running in a garage? Would you prefer to leave an electric vehicle running in a garage, closed garage, or a gasoline vehicle? Nobody's going to argue that. You'll be dead from carbon monoxide poisoning within 20 minutes. So there's local emissions, which undoubtedly electric vehicles are zero emissions. They're not pumping anything out into the local atmosphere. So for me, kids' schools, local shopping centers, all these places where you can idle, not doing any damage to the local air quality there. And there's a significant improvement in air quality where EVs are adopted locally. So obviously then take it a step further back. How are you powering that electricity? And I think it comes down to, there is truth, of course. If your grid is, if I plug in Poland where the grid is very heavily coal powered, I have a coal powered car, there is no denying that. But if I plug in the Pacific Northwest, I have a hydroelectric powered car. If I plug in depending on where you are in California, I may have a solar powered car. And if I have solar powered on my roof and a battery electric kind of storage system in my garage, then I have, 100% zero emissions car. That's other than the production of stuff like the solar panels, but you're getting very, very pernickety at that point to say these are not clean cars. So typically there is a question of how do you power your vehicle, but coming with an electric vehicle also comes with a lot of people kind of incentive and a desire to make the grid cleaner. So they tend to buy cleaner electricity. If they don't put, solar panels on their house or battery storage in their basement, then because, some people can't get that done in their living situation, they maybe buy offsets from their local power providers, so they're buying cleaner energy maybe they charge with a network like EVgo, which is 100%, renewable energy. There's many ways to kind of get that, offset, even if your grid is relatively dirty, to make it cleaner as an EV driver. So you can, make that investment. But yeah, I mean, there's no, no doubt that if a car is, in West Virginia and has purely 80% of its grid powered by coal, you're probably driving on coal power. And that comes down to personal choice. Like, you can go and spend more money and put solar panels on your roof and solve that problem, But at least in that case, it's locally produced energy, right? So that's providing money to the West Virginian economy or the coal mines or whatever else you want to talk about. But instead of, ships taking oil across the ocean, and then big tankers, diesel tankers, moving it across, and then you're still, a gas station is powered by electricity, right? So there's a lot of pieces in this puzzle that it doesn't just, oil springs out of the ground and then goes into a Prius. It's there's a lot of stuff being burned and electricity being used just to make that gasoline get to the pump in the first place. So there's almost no creditable study done that doesn't show EVs as significantly cleaner over the lifetime of the vehicle. But also, if the owner takes that on themselves to make their driving cleaner, it's always going to be the better environmental choice if that's something that is driving you to get one.
Now, with lithium mining being so polluting, how sustainable are EVs?
So lithium is massively abundant resource, but it's underrepresented in the mining practices at the moment. So the places that you're getting these materials are not ideal. There's places in Africa where it's not mined sustainably. There are places that it's impacting the environment, but there are so many technologies, abundant amount of lithium across the US alone. And it kind of comes down to this: how are we going to develop the infrastructure to build batteries and electric vehicles? And from the beginning, we're very, at the moment, it's people just scrabbling around to get parts because the infrastructure to build battery pack is set up for, the device in your pocket or the things we're these zooms on. So they're tiny. These are, car-size batteries require a car-size, an industrial-size battery production facility and process. So you're talking about when you're designing that, and as GM, for example, is at the moment building a battery plant in Ohio and Michigan, these have to be sustainable. You've got to find the pieces, the places you can go to get that stuff locally, sustainably, and minimizing the impact on the environment. Anything that you're building is going to be, by definition, taking materials out of the ground, and it's not as good for the environment as walking, right? But realistically, we need to, we need vehicles, and these things need to go as clean as we can get them. So there are so many business models springing up about where stuff like lithium and the various rare earth minerals are coming from, that I couldn't speak to any one practice. It's going to be on the consumer as well as the automakers to say, we work with each other to sustainably source these things, because the whole point of EVs, like if we were to throw that out the window right now and say electric vehicles are the only solution, and then forget about everything before them, how you make them, how you fuel them, how clean the grid is, where you source your raw materials, then there's no point in going to electric vehicles then, right? Because we're missing out a key piece of the puzzle. So you have to take it end to end. It's got to be a circular supply chain that kind of, sustainably sourced, powered, manufactured as cleanly as you can. And then, recycling at the end of it as well. And, I don't know if you'll get onto it, but, the battery recycling needs to be in place so that that's a circular system. And most of those things are going back into vehicles or places where they're not going to, do damage to the environment that they're trying to, do better for in the first place.
Now, what is the current stage of lithium-ion battery recycling, and to what extent can the discarded batteries be reused?
So a lot. That's actually one of the brighter parts of it. It's difficult to know where to mine the materials, maybe, and there's be done there. But when it comes out the other end, there's a laundry list of ways you can use this stuff. So initially, right now, a lot of these used packs we've only really got to the point of where they're ending their life, because, as I say, we're only 10 years into this, so the packs last at least that long, probably longer. But some in used Nissan Leafs and BMW i3s are being taken for stationary storage at charging stations. So they're like a backup in the system, so that they can take in energy from the grid, and if there's power outages, or if there's high demand fees, which can be a problem for electric vehicle charging, they can offset some of that and use them as stationary storage on the ground. Same for homes, like we talked about before. You've got solar or some kind of wind generation on your site. A car that has degraded battery and can't go its 250 miles anymore might be annoying, but that battery sitting in your garage or somewhere to store energy on your property can be very good. It still doesn't matter that it's got lost 10%, 15% of its capacity. It's still storing 50 kilowatt hours of energy for you. You can use that to power your home in a blackout. You can use it to store the energy from the sun in the daytime while you're at work, back into the car at night, that kind of thing. So battery storage is a big one. And then taking it apart, there's they can do 95% of the materials at the moment in a lithium-ion battery, and recover most of those pieces for either future battery packs or other projects that the manufacturer might want to put them towards. But I think GM just announced investment with a company called Li-Cycle in the last couple of days, and it's all a part of this focus on the manufacturing and the end of life being clean as well as the vehicle. It's got to be a holistic approach, otherwise there's no point not really going this way. So, but yeah, 95% at the moment. And the biggest problem you hear from recycling companies is not, we can't do it, we don't have the technology. It's that there's not enough batteries. We need this flow, and it's coming, because these cars are, Nissan Leafs will start to come off the road and people will scrap them, and then you'll want to bring that back into the recycling process. So it's doable. They just haven't had the volume of battery packs, because they're getting things from cell phones and laptops instead of this big whole vehicle.
And I read it somewhere that like when the life cycle of a battery in a car ends, it's not like it's completely useless. It's just that the charge that it can store has just reduced, the charge that it can store in it. So you just like you can probably give it to a recycling company, and they will like further recycle it.
It's the moment it's around an $8,000 piece of kit. It's going to be less as more of them come on the market, but it's still the most valuable piece of the car, right? It's it only is useless, or as useless as the user's driving case. If you're going 10 miles to work every day and coming back and not using that car for anything else, it doesn't matter that the battery could degrade 70-80%, which it won't do, but hypothetically you could still use that vehicle. But if somebody is needing that 200 miles plus, they can replace packs in cars. They can pay to take that battery pack back, recycle it, use it for storage, whatever is the most sensible use at that time. But just because it uses its primary life and the user can't make any use of it anymore, it doesn't mean it doesn't have a secondary or tertiary life as something else.
Exactly. I learned this from the battery of my laptop. Like recently, the battery of my laptop just ran out, and I like I couldn't use it anymore, but it still had like 30% charging capacity. So I was like, well, it's not completely useless. It's not that I can just throw it away. So I will probably give it to a recycler, and he will probably make the best use out of it. So that's how I learned it.
It's all the same, the same pieces of the puzzle. It's just in a laptop we have ready replacements ready to go. You kind of take it for granted that you change these things change your phone every few years, or change your laptop every 3 or 4 years, because either the battery life, it's going to be outdated, right? There's just, you get faster, better machines, and we need to be able to recycle the stuff that is out of date but still useful.
Now, graphene technology has been in talks for years. So how viable of an alternative are there to current lithium-ion solutions in terms of environmental friendliness, manufacturing, and life cycles?
Yeah, we start to get into the area now where my EV expert tag is why I don't want to go there, because we're very close to engineering stuff and battery
Mm,
technology. I keep an eye on the headlines. I kind of try
mm,
and stay up with it, but my primary day job is in marketing and creative, so I'm not an engineer by trade or any other note. So honestly, you're hitting the limits of my knowledge at that point. So you may want to school me on that one.
yeah, so basically, like if even I have to, like read a bit about this technology. So I was thinking of, like asking you about it, but no worries.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a fair question. And like this is the thing, I get a lot of questions about solid state batteries and lithium metal, and it's just there's so many different initiatives in
Mm,
any one 1 week that
mm,
this stuff there are breakthroughs in the lab I find quite often, which just you can't. They're big, hyperbole
mm,
kind of finds of like this is a breakthrough, this is going to change transportation.
mm,
And then, 5 years later, it's like, wasn't that supposed to be on the roads by now?
mm,
Shouldn't we have something happening? And
mm,
it's these things work in lab settings sometimes, but
mm,
the practical application has on mass has problems. So it's just trying to keep up. I
mm,
tend to try and stick to what is in the pipeline of manufacturers and automakers, because that at least is
mm,
going to be a part of their roadmap for vehicles. So you can look at Tesla's battery day.
mm,
You look at GM trying to add about 20 or 30% of its R&D budget to new battery technologies, and
mm,
that's where you'll see stuff coming through that is potentially going to be applied to electric vehicles. But as far as battery technology breakthroughs, it's just you kind of have to take everyone with a little bit of a grain of salt and just
mm,
say what the real world likelihood that that's going to be on the roads within the
mm.
next 5 years.
Yeah. Now, there is a company named Lucid, which also makes some great electric cars, and their cars compete with Tesla. So, do you think that Lucid makes better cars than Tesla? And which one would you personally go with, Lucid or Tesla?
So yeah, they don't technically make better cars than Tesla because they don't actually have any cars on the road except for the
Mm,
ones that the CEO is driving, around New York
mm,
City and San Francisco for marketing ends, really. But that's no criticism.
mm,
Rivian as a brand I'm excited about, but they
mm,
don't have cars, for sale at the moment. So you have to take each of these with, you know, the likelihood that they'll get to market. Lucid is going to make it. I think there's
mm,
no doubt they have enough backing, funding, and they have Peter Rawlinson, who was, despite what Elon says, was the mind, who was very influential on bringing the Model S to market.
mm,
So they have a very good pedigree. I
mm,
like the way they operate. They're not out there tweeting and saying that they're well, that may change recently. They've done some interesting marketing recently, as Elon was on SNL and they were tweeting that they were the first to 500 miles.
mm,
Um, I think that's going to be a luxury end of the market, and I
mm,
do think they'll have the car to go head to head with the Model S. I'm
mm,
not sure they'll have the charging network. It's kind of it's hard to beat the supercharger network at the moment.
mm,
It's tough to say where Lucid will be in a year or 18 months time when they launch. They may have a comparable network because they'll be hooked
mm.
up with Electrify America. But
Yeah.
it's going to be. I think he knows how to
Mm,
build the EV, and this is
mm,
going to be the first EVs that actually goes head to head with Tesla on range
mm,
and efficiency. I personally would probably go with a Lucid just because I think everybody has a Tesla now. It's not
mm,
something new to me. It's the specs are always impressive. That's kind of
mm,
goes hand in hand with Tesla.
mm,
I just I like to move away from that minimalism a little bit. I like to have a screen in front of me. I like to have something that is a bit different and a little bit new. And
mm.
I think Lucid will deliver on that, as well as the specs of 500 plus miles, quick acceleration. Yeah, that would be my choice.
Hmm. Now, there is an argument which always goes on between enthusiasts whether there are any drivers friendly electric cars, like one with proper, that will just make the driver work, just like a manual Porsche 911 GT3. So, will there be a driver focused electric car?
Yeah, I think you could make the argument that the Porsche Taycan is, is out there in that
Hmm.
kind of category. There's only a few of them, because there's only a few models of electric vehicles really
Hmm.
at the moment. I think when you start to get into brands that have a history of, driving driver focused technology, BMW,
Hmm.
uh, Porsche is obviously up there, and you just don't know what companies like Lucid or Rivian are going to do. Rivian's going to
Hmm.
be more road
Yeah.
focused, but
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to be able to separate that driving history and pedigree and manufacturing, vehicle manufacturing pedigree
Hmm.
with the electrification. I think they're going to want it to be on brand. So when BMW says it's the ultimate driving machine, I
Yeah.
don't think they're going to sacrifice a lot of that. BMW i3 notwithstanding, that was a very different
Hmm.
different attempt at a car.
Hmm.
But I think that as we get more and more, and as these companies start to figure out how to build, get the basics of building an EV, know how to make it, efficient, long range, all the things that people need to have just to even get in the seat and consider one. Then I think you'll start to see, really driver focused, machines that take the best of EVs, the
Hmm.
spaciousness, the low center of gravity, the good weight distribution, and start to apply them so that they're more of a driver's experience. And I think you'll see a lot of specialist vehicles in performance categories, that go beyond just the
Hmm.
initial boost acceleration. I think you'll certainly see, track modes that are more engaging and things that bring over enthusiasts. But right now that's not the focus. Focus is to get people who do their A to B commute into electric vehicles so that
Hmm.
local emissions down, that kind of thing. And beyond that, I think the engineers are going to have a field day because EV technology opens up a whole range of possibilities to make the car more drivable.
Hmm. Yeah, the Porsche Taycan was one of the first cars that actually, like made me and fall in love with electric cars. I was like, well, if I were to go for an electric car, this might be just the one. Just that it's a bit too expensive.
Yeah, I mean that's that's always going to be the thing, right? There's going to be a time, but there's no reason that something like an electric Miata or these kind of enthusiast cars that everybody goes to won't be made eventually. But it's just batteries have been expensive until
Hmm.
now, and people don't manufacturers don't necessarily have the desire to go and do
Hmm.
these one-off projects. But with a Porsche, you can't make a driver boring Porsche, right? And that would
Hmm.
be sacrilege. So if they did that, they would, that would shoot the brand in the foot
Hmm.
for years to come as far as electrification. So any Porsche that gets made with an EV tag is going to have to, be a hell of a drive because that's the legacy of the brand. That's the DNA.
Yeah. And if they make anything against it, then yeah, it would like go completely against the company's values, the cars which they have been accustomed to made over all these years and decades.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe there's Lotus getting into that
Hmm.
area.
Yeah.
Rimac, supercars. That's always pointed to as an example of someone who is just laser focused on the driving experience.
Hmm.
So you may start to see some really impressive, not just supercars but drivers supercars.
Hmm.
Starting to be made on one-off basis or in a very small batch.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just the industry has to mature. As I
Hmm.
said, there's no electric trucks right now, right? And that's the biggest selling vehicle category in America. So
Hmm.
there's a clear. There are some priorities that we have to bat out of the park, and we have to get the Ford F-150 Lightning, we have to get the
Hmm.
Chevy Silverado EV, all these things, plus the Rivian and the Cybertruck if it ends up looking like it does.
Hmm.
All these things need to be on the road, at least in North America, before we can start to talk about, the real niche product.
Yeah. And I think that EVs, the EV revolution gave every country in the world a chance to like become a part of the EV revolution. For example, if I talk about the age where when IC cars started to develop, there were only a few countries that were capable of making an IC cars of their own. For example, USA, Japan, and maybe other few countries. But like the rest of the countries were not so capable. But with EVs, like for example, if I talk about my country here, like two of the most prominent manufacturers in IC used to be Tata and Mahindra, just these two brands, and they have a huge global presence as well. But now we have a hypercar maker in India, okay, and they are making an electric hypercar. We have a electric maker in India that is making a car that is like the Indian Model 3. Okay, and we have some two-wheeler startups in India that are making some of the wildest looking electric superbikes. So I think that
Mhm.
it's giving each and every country a chance to like become a part of the revolution. Recently, I got to hear that Sri Lanka is a very small country, and like we never have heard about them participating, but they have
Mhm.
made a 800 bhp electric supercar. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's how it all starts, right? There's just so they bring out a prototype. You have people who are
Hmm.
passionate about building something special,
Hmm.
and it can scale, And there's not. I think for a long time in the automotive sector, it was assumed that the capital required and the amount of talent you needed to
Hmm.
get into the
Hmm.
automotive space was just
Hmm.
you couldn't do it, and that was why there was so much laughing at Tesla initially,
Yeah.
because it's just like no way this guy from
Hmm.
Silicon Valley is going to make it happen. But that kind of kicked open the door, and there's no reason why it doesn't have to happen in the US, doesn't
Hmm.
have to happen in Norway. It just has to be someone ambitious with good
Hmm.
engineers and a commitment to getting something that's useful, that solves a use case on the road with an electrified drivetrain, and
Hmm.
you're off to the races.
Yeah. Now, what are the issues that EVs currently suffer with that you think that will be resolved in the coming future?
I mean, so the biggest one has been range anxiety,
Hmm.
which I think we've, already we can say, is almost put to bed. Really, we've talked about the local commutes and how far people
Hmm.
really have to go versus how far they think they have to go. When we're talking about 400, 500-mile range EVs, it's just that's put to bed. Really, it's not.
Hmm.
The single charge is kind of solved now, with the exception of a few places that people have to drive hundreds of miles every day.
Yeah.
The next thing is charger anxiety. We've talked about Tesla's supercharger advantage, that we
Hmm.
know it just works. They have the coverage now and the
Hmm.
reliability. People don't need to be worrying about, charging on a long trip. It's already a
Hmm.
bit longer, although I
Yeah.
think, again, another one that's coming down when you're talking about 15 to 20 minutes for a stop, to get to 80%. I don't think that really is going to take much out of anybody's long trip. You need a place to break that, to take a break, to buy your coffee and snacks and everything
Hmm.
else. So that's largely solved, but you need that charger
Hmm.
or the charge location to not only be there in the first place, but to be reliable. You don't
Hmm.
need to turn up and have this thing, take you another 10 minutes to start up on customer service on the phone, or to have the right ID card. All of these things, which have been the kind of problem with non-Tesla EVs for the last
Hmm.
5-10 years, starting to get addressed. There are technologies that are where you can plug the vehicle in, it just works, it starts charging, all the stuff happens with under the back end.
Hmm.
But there's still some way to go on that, although I think the pieces are in place to make that
Yeah.
solved in the next couple of years. And then really just the kind of stuff that we were talking about, with the top end speed and being able to sustain that kind of, it's really about the efficiency of the pack in
Yeah.
that circumstance. Being able to have that high performance and crack at 80 miles an hour, 85 if you're in certain parts of the US, for extended periods of time on the interstate.
Hmm.
Just do whatever speed you want. So you're not thinking about what's my energy usage here, and where do I have to cut off my performance. If we can get to that point, that's a bit further down the line, I think, because we need to get
Hmm.
models from every manufacturer.
Yeah.
Tesla will probably solve it first. Rivian and Lucid have a good chance of doing that, but it may be something that has to come in line with battery technology. Um, and that's really it.
Hmm.
The biggest thing, I guess, is the best advantage of an electric vehicle is being able to charge in your driveway.
Yeah.
So we have to solve for people who are in apartment complexes or condos, places where they can't necessarily install home charging themselves. I'd like everybody to have that advantage, so that there are just chargers in parking garages, at places where people can go if they don't have the ability to have a driveway at home, but they can still charge overnight, because it really is one of the biggest advantages to wake up to a full charge and cut out that gasoline trip every week altogether.
Hmm.
That's something I'd like to get to everybody.
Yeah. But there is a technology which is called the Qualcomm Halo Inductive Road Charging. So what it
Mhm.
does is like there is a pad below your car. There are like a certain electric pads that are on the road, You just
Mhm.
park your car, like near that spot within a particular like 1 to 2 meters, and the car, like automatically receives wireless charging from it.
Mhm.
So even
Yeah, I
if
mean,
you live in an apartment, you can charge your car. Like, yeah, there are solutions being in development.
yeah, I mean, for large scale complexes, that would be a great solution. You know, you're talking about the installation fee being the biggest.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's a new technology, so it's automatically expensive, and then you have the question mark over who pays for it, you know,
Yeah.
who gets to use it, who gets the benefits. So does that cost of installing something like that factor into your rent prices when you're, you know, renting an apartment, that kind of thing? But I mean, there's no doubt there are solutions, you know, that
Hmm.
we have electricity everywhere by the very
Hmm.
nature of, you know, you're talking to me now because of electricity, right? You know, so
Uh,
it's in your
hmm.
building. You know, we can make it happen, but it's a case of figuring out all the pieces. Who's going to pay for it? How do we fund these initiatives?
Hmm.
And just takes us back to advocacy, really. You know,
Hmm.
telling people ahead of time these are the things that we need to consider. We can't just
Hmm.
throw, you know, tens of millions of EVs on the road and hope it all works out. There's going to have to be
Yeah,
an infrastructure building up at the same time.
exactly. Now, how is the EV revolution in USA going on? Like, if you stand on the sidewalk for a few minutes, how many EVs can you spot?
Well, me, I'll do pretty good. You know, as I said, we're neighboring Tesla town. My town could almost be Chevy Bolt town because I see at least three or four whenever I drive my kids to soccer
Hmm.
or the various places. So we're in good shape, but it is bubbles. You know, there are it's
Hmm.
certainly cities, metro areas, or obviously where people have a second car or they're using it as their city car.
Hmm.
That's going to tilt it in favor of you know, electric vehicles. If I was in California, I'd see one
Hmm.
every, you know, fifth car, 10th car. It would just be the
Hmm.
nature of they drive out there, because that's where all this has started from the US with regulation from
Hmm.
California's Air Resources Board.
Hmm.
If I go to Ohio, even that's, you know, sort of middle America in a lot of ways, you know, more regular kind of city. You'll certainly see a lot of Teslas. You may not see as many non-Tesla EVs, but you know, you will start to catch them every, you know, 5-10 minutes on the road.
Hmm.
But go over to a place like, you know, the kind of more rural heartland states, Kansas, Dakotas,
Hmm.
Montana, that they just, you know, to be fair to them, they don't have the infrastructure that would necessarily make it viable, or the
Hmm.
vehicles that they want to buy. You know, if you're talking about a truck buying American
Hmm.
in the kind of more rural parts of the country, there is no way that you should buy an EV because you
Hmm.
can't, for a start, you can't get a truck, right?
Hmm.
So that's still on the horizon. And you probably won't have a place to charge it if you're on one of these long trips. So
Yeah.
there are portions of people we need to, you know, get to, and those would be along with infrastructure as the kind of, you know, concerns with that. But for me, you know, it's the East Coast, West Coast, pretty well established. There's not a shortage here at all. We're only at like 2 or 3% of the vehicle market nationally. But you go out to California, which is kind of the way things are going, and it's above 5%, trending up to 10% maybe in the next year or two. So yeah, you can see it coming. You know, that's what's going to happen East Coast, and then factoring into the country as more and more kind of infrastructure and suitable vehicles come out.
Hmm. That's great. Now, what do you think about electric cars getting equipped with the self-driving features? Many people, including me, feel that they are reducing their driver's involvement with their car.
Yeah, I've never seen the fuss, to be honest. It's not something that I go to. It's probably the last thing I cover if I review a car on the channel, or, you know, try and do a preview of one. It's, oh yeah, and it has some self-driving stuff as well.
Hmm.
Because it's kind of like, you know, I was very late to cruise control as well. I didn't
Hmm.
really enjoy that initially. So I may not be the most, you know, tech forward person
Hmm.
to go with this stuff. But I can see the, you know, we talked about it earlier,
Hmm.
there are driving situations where you really don't want to be, you know, having to do everything. You don't want to
Yeah.
be the accelerator and keeping it in lane, and, you know, in stop
Hmm.
start traffic. That can certainly have its
Hmm.
advantages. I think, you know, there's no doubt that a
Hmm.
computer can respond faster in some instances. So
Hmm.
automatic braking, emergency braking, stuff like that can certainly be a benefit.
Yeah.
I just think it's so there's a conflict between what someone like, you know, Elon Musk is obviously the kind of standard bearer for this stuff and says it will be out next week basically on every tweet,
Hmm.
and it's it hasn't happened. He's been saying this stuff 2018, 2019. It's supposed to be, a couple of months down the road, and that there's going to be a massive regulatory shift before we can do full self-driving, right? So it's driver's assistance at the moment. Increasingly impressive driver assistance, and certainly things that can help you on a long, boring drive. In stretches of the US, there's just roads that are just straight and tedious, and really there's no driver skill involved. It's just keeping the thing pointed in the right direction. So that makes sense. I'm not a massive, I don't think it's the core of EVs. I think it's part of the change, but I don't think it needs to lead the way. I think first and foremost, we need to make sure people understand these things are quick, fun to drive, have cost savings, all that kind of stuff. And tech forward too. They'll be equipped for all the things that you want to do when regulators decide that self-driving is a thing that is safe enough to happen. But at the moment, it's not. I might use alternating cruise control, but beyond that, I'm not that interested myself.
Yeah, man. Even even I am not very interested in that at the moment. Things like cruise control are good to use once you're on an expressway or a highway. But yeah, I think that EV driving is still is still a very a far thing before you can completely rely on it.
Yeah, and it's fun. Driving is fun. There's not. I mean, there are certainly as we say, there are use cases where driving is not fun. But if you're out on the road, then there's a lot of places. I'll sometimes just take a different road, because I know it's got more interesting twists and turns, or there's better scenery, or there's there's more engaging driving dynamics to go that route. And that's not going to be taken away. People are still going to want to drive their cars. But I don't see it changing significantly. It's going to be a slow process. We've got so move to lane centering, and then slowly we'll get into a thing where it'll say, okay, well, we'll let the car do an overtaking maneuver on quiet highways, this kind of stuff, and it'll get there. It's just not going to be like a next week there'll be a car that will you could drive you to the mall or the nearest city. It's they've got some way to go.
So what is your dream EV to own?
I mean, it's hard to look beyond the Taycan. I think if you wanted something just ridiculously fun and completely impractical, I not taking kids and dogs in that, but yeah, it's that's the one that I would want to get in, as a next kind of fun drive. Beyond that, I mean, it's hard. There are so many coming down the pike. Realistically, stuff like the Ioniq 5. I think is a really good looking car, harks back to some older kind of rally cars that I enjoyed in my youth, like the Lancia Delta. There's, the features kind of go hand in hand as well. So it's partially driving, but it's also like, how quick is this thing going to charge? How, spacious is the cabin? Because you really start to strip out a lot of the unnecessary, the transmission tunnel, the bits that make such a nice kind of open EV cabin. So it's kind of, we've got to see what people come out with. I'm very excited because there's so many models that we have to see to market. I think the Rivian R1T is going to be huge. I can imagine doing camping trips with the family and that, and getting out into the mountains, which are very close to us. So yeah, it's hard to pick one. If I had to pick it for just thrashing around on the roads, the Taycan. If I had to pick it for family usage, it would be probably the Rivian R1T.
Yeah, same here. Exact same choices. Maybe for the family one, I might go for the Hummer EV because of all those crab modes and 1,000 horsepower.
True. Yeah. See, the minute you say one, there's another one coming down the stretch. So it's just, if money were no object, you'd have no problem spending it.
Now, what are your future plans with the industry? Like, do you plan on doing something in the EV industry?
Yeah, I mean, I write at the moment for a site called findthebestcarprice.com. They're going over to a lot of EV content just to help people kind of do the the due diligence and understand the transition, what they need to consider before they go electric. I write a little bit for Talk News on some of the industry, the models coming out, that kind of thing. And my channel Plug and Play EV is kind of dedicated to showing people what it's like day to day to live, with an electric vehicle, pros, cons. There's downsides to it, and I want to make sure people know that before they get in, an EV, I just want to make sure that, people going into an electric vehicle know that they are, know what they can do and what they can't, what's available, that kind of thing, and where we are in the transition. But I think it's the best thing I can do is, let people know why it's a good option, and encourage them to get in an EV, because as soon as you drive one, it's quite hard to go back to just a regular gas car. Again, making the distinction between performance and daily driver. I think most people could easily be convinced that an EV makes the most sense as their daily driver. So if I can find roles to do that, that's where I'll be.
Now, Steve, do you have any parting words for the audience?
No, I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody and talk to you. It's good. I think these conversations are helpful because I think it's that binary kind of choice of do I drive an EV, do I drive a combustion engine? I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. You can have both in various ways, sometimes in one car. And I think it's just about doing the right research, connecting with people like myself or anybody that's, knowledgeable about electric vehicles, has spent time living with them in your area. And there's no reason, to have it be a battle. These things are going to work hand in hand. There's going to be opportunities to drive amazing combustion vehicles. And there's going to be, a lot of places for electric vehicles in future. So keep an open mind, get in a test drive for, whatever kind of fits your needs. And I don't think people are going to be disappointed.
Steve, it was great having you as a guest. Loved it, man. And yeah,
thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always good to connect, and I definitely like to hear your recommendations about performance cars. Maybe I should get into some churro and rent some good thrashers for the weekend.
Yeah, for sure. Give them a try. And yeah, this is one of the longest episodes that I have ever done. So yeah,
you have
it was great.
editing.
Yeah, just shows how great the conversation was that I couldn't even get an idea of how the time went.
Yeah, either that or I rambled on for too long.
Yeah,
I'm sure your editing skills are good.
Yeah, they are. I like to think so.
Yeah, it's a great question as well. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It's if you want to do something the reverse, I think it might be interesting to have your perspective on the channel, do something like that. And,
for sure. And thank you for providing your valuable insights. Even I have like a clear perspective of EVs now.
Yeah. Perfect. That's the goal.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that will be all for this time.
Let me know if you need any help with anything, any kind of follow-up questions or just kind of clarifying bits and pieces. I can send you links, all that kind of stuff. But enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, and we will, for sure have another podcast on this topic as well when some new cars come in and some new EVs come in.
There's no shortage of topics coming up. So whenever you have a question, get me on the horn.